In the past, deleting a file was considered safe data destruction, but we know that it only clears the pointer to the file and not the data itself. Today, there are many options when it comes to destroying data, even though some hard drives seem almost indestructible. Today's guest is Paul Katzoff. Paul is the CEO of WhiteCanyon Software, where they specialize in data erasure for corporate and government. These customers need secure data destruction that meets NIST, HIPAA, and other compliance standards for hard drive and mobile device erasure. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Pray Podcast. All right, Paul, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray Podcast today.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to be here on your podcast with your audience. Love the chance to talk about data security with you.
So let's jump into it. Can you tell me your background with respect to data security and media?
Absolutely. My name is Paul Katzoff. I'm the CEO of WhiteCanyon Software. We're a data erasure software company based here in Utah. We've been in business for 23 years, providing the wipe drive software tool platform to military, government, and commercial, and enterprise and home users. We've started off way back in 1998 with a 3.5-inch floppy diskette. And I remember those days.
I do.
And it went from there. It got Air Force approved, and we went around the globe. Every Air Force base globally used wipe drive to erase their desktop computers back then. And since that time, we've moved into the commercial market, enterprise market, and had to do a whole bunch of different types of deployments to erase data securely on any data-bearing device. And that's where we sit today.
Awesome. So let's talk about, before we start talking about how to properly dispose of media, can we talk about what some of the risks are that you've encountered or that your clients are concerned about when it comes to what's on the media?
Yes. So data is becoming more and more important every year. GDPR was the big first legislation that kind of addressed this out in the EU. Since that time, HIPAA has enforced financial penalties, and same with Fiserv. So on the corporate side, there's now a financial incentive to make sure there's no data breaches and data doesn't leave your facility. So on that side, it's moved that way. On the state level, California has the strictest California data privacy law in the nation. But we also know with our contacts at the federal government that a U.S. federal data privacy law is in the works. It's in committee right now, so it's upcoming, and that's going to address some issues, probably not to the extent as GDPR, but it is going to address a lot of the data issues that we have out there today.
So I remember a news story, and this is probably further back than maybe I want to remember.
Sure.
That there was a company that was buying photocopiers from police departments, law offices, and hospitals. And the odd thing is that they were buying these used printers from them below market value. So let's say you could sell your corporate printer for $5,000 used. These guys were paying $6,000 or $7,000 for it. And then on the back end, they were turning around and selling them for less than they bought them for. So the question was how are these guys making money? And it turned out that most of these entities weren't even aware that there were hard drives in these photocopiers that had digital images of the last 10,000 pages that were copied. Yeah. And there was an criminal organization that was going around getting police records, medical records.
All sorts of information, yeah. This was 2011, 2012, and I remember it was a shock to the nation because all of a sudden everyone said our copiers have hard drives in it. And Ricoh and the other manufacturers were like, yeah, every photocopy you make, we save it to the hard drive, and then we print from that image. And it was a shock. Even the leasers, everyone was like, uh-oh. And on the healthcare side, they're like, so every document we've scanned, everything we've printed off the printer is on these hard drives. And the answer was yes. And yeah, exactly. It was a big data exposure, and everyone had to adjust to properly erase those drives in a short amount of time because of the risk with that. But yeah, that was shocking to everyone.
Yeah, I remember seeing that news story, and that was the first thing that went through my mind. I was like, they've got a hard drive on it? Like, why do you need a hard drive? Then how else would you store the image that you're copying? Like, it makes sense when you think about it, but.
Yeah, and the technology had gotten there, and it was just natural on their side to say, hey, let's put a drive in this. and no one on either side, the manufacturer's side or any side, and it's been addressed now. The manufacturers now erase the image as soon as it's been created on there, as soon as it's done being used. But at the time, it was like, yeah, of course, we want to print it that way, and it's the simplest, methodology, and everyone was just shocked. And it was a good experience for the market to kind of see the risk there.
So have there been other kind of surprises that you're aware of kind of media that people just weren't thinking about being used for criminal practices?
I think for the most part, people have gotten on board with where the data is stored and how it's stored and how it can be accessed by bad actors. We used to get calls. This was always shocking to us. It's better now, but about a decade ago or 8 years ago, we'd get calls from Fortune 100 companies. And the guy on the other end of the line would say, hey, I'm going to tell you this, but don't tell anyone. We haven't been erasing any computers here the last 50 years. And we donate them, we resell them. Whatever we do, we've never erased. And we've kind of realized internally, there's a huge risk here. Let's address it. So I think on most kind of the process level, it wasn't a part of what most corporations did. And now it's being enacted. Now it's being kind of required by the data security policies for corporations. And that's solving a lot of these big headaches.
Gotcha. So let's talk about, what are some of the historic ways that people destroyed, if you had a hard drive and you're like, okay, I can't use the computer anymore. What were some of the historic ways that we used to get rid of media?
Yeah, so data erasure, data destruction has been around for ages. We used to have tapes, and then we had floppy diskettes, and then we had the zip disks, zip drives, and then now we have, of course, platter-based drives as well. They were usually all just shredded, incinerated, drilled with a drill press, take them out back, hit them with a hammer, whatever you could do to destroy the drive and then throw it away. It's kind of been the typical go-to for most corporations. And even right now, the federal government, the NSA just came out with their December best practices, and there's no data erasure in there. They want every device destroyed, every data-bearing device destroyed for inside the NSA. So there's still some entity saying, hey, this is the best practice. This is what we want to do. On our side, we're saying, hey, there's some issues with physical destruction, and those need to be addressed in many ways as far as circular economy goes, as well as chain of custody. There's some major issues, and let's kind of address those with software-based erasure as well.
So I know it used to be that there was this, the thought process was if it's a personal computer, you just I guess a lot of people thought, well, I just need to delete my files. And we all know that deleting files doesn't actually delete files. It just deletes the reference to the file.
Hopefully most of us know that. But yeah, I'd say 80% of the public doesn't know that part.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll make it very clear here that if you are on your computer, you hit delete of a file, it doesn't actually delete the file. It just deletes the reference to the file. The file stays there and can be fairly easily recovered by a recovery program, even recovery software, let alone having to send it off to a forensic analysis to get it.
Well, the other part of that is the reference to it is gone, but also our drives are so large now that space on the drive isn't overwritten for a long length of time. So it could just sit there ready to be recovered for 2 or 3 years. Whereas, I don't know, in the olden days, but a long time ago with smaller drives, you would use all the space over and over again with different files and videos, and it kind of get overwritten naturally. Now that data could sit there, or that file could sit there for who knows how long.
Yeah. And so the next method was, if you're a home user, you get some drive erase software, and it just did like a single pass, writing zeros and ones to the drive. And you're like, okay, everything is good. Yeah. But I remember in all those software packages, there were a couple of different settings. There was, the quick delete, the secure delete, and then I work for a government institution. I need to spend the next 3 days writing zeros and ones over the drives.
Yeah. And I think that's where, first off, those are the different data erasure patterns that are out there. So the biggest one was Gutmann's 13 overwrite pattern. There's a DoD 7 pass. There's a DoD 5 pass. There's a DoD 3 pass. There's all these multiple erasure patterns where you'd have to go through that full drive 3, 5, 7, 13 times in order to get the certificate and saying, hey, everything's been erased from that drive. And that's how it was there for until I'd say until 2014, 2015, the DoD3 was a go-to. It's just what everyone used to erase any device out there.
So is that what the conventional wisdom is today on current technology?
It's changed because of the NIST 888 document. They've come up with some new requirements, but let me speak kind of to the DoD issue there. The multi-pass was required because on these platter-based drives, it was kind of like a record player, the head's going around writing and reading. As it did it, there was a little bit of a wobble. And so a research paper came out in the early 2000s that said, hey, if you take off that platter and examine it with an electron microscope, this is very expensive, very, almost impossible to do anyways as far as resources go. But you may be able to see where the wobble has left the zeros and ones from the last pass. And so you could pull that information off. Since 2011, the technology on drives have gotten to a point where there's no wobble. And that's hard for us to say because it's so small. I mean, we're looking at, I don't even know the micro size that this is at on the Western Digital and other manufacturers side. But that's been kind of taken away. So NIST looked at this and said, hey, we're doing this DoD3 pass that was recommended back in 03 and 06. Let's update this, first off, for platter-based drives, but also for SSDs, because there's flash storage in those devices. We need to address that as well. So NIST 888 came out, and pretty much what it said is a single overwrite pass is enough to securely erase any device. And on flash media, you need to use a sanitized disk or secure erase command, ATA command. If you do that, all the data on that device has been securely erased, and forensically, you can't recover any information.
Mm-hmm. So is that what most consumers should be doing then? 3 passes if they're gonna donate their computer somewhere or throw away a hard drive?
Hey, the single pass is enough for them now. That's all they need to do now. That's the de facto accepted kind of methodology. There's still some, old school IT managers and others out there that are saying, hey, I got to do the DoD3. That's what my data security doc says for the corporations. For my corporation, that's our requirement. That's what we need to do. But in that case, we're kind of educating them, say, hey, read this information on NIST 800, figure out what you need to do. But on your side, a NIST single overwrite is compliant enough. It's been tested. On our side, we've been erasing drives here for 23 years. So a lot of our corporations are IT asset disposition companies. So they take secondhand computers from corporations, they process them, erase them, and resell them. Well, part of their certification is they have to get 1% of their devices forensically examined, and they ship these off to get tested. So, they're all doing the NIST 800 wipe or compliant wipe, and then they go and forensically examine them, and none of them have had any of their drives fail. Mm-hmm. So on the actual use case and examination level, it's also successful. So yeah, single overwrite's all you need on your side.
That's good to know. And I suppose it becomes more problematic with the pandemic that you now have people working on computers that are outside the company control. The person's working on their home computer.
Yes.
It gets a little bit messy.
Well, first off, bravo to all of us going remote so quickly, right? I mean, in the 90s, companies would have stopped. Who would you have gotten paid from just being at home, not doing anything? How would you have been able to work remote? So first off, we pushed everyone remote within, 2 or 3 weeks. We had school children go remote within 3 weeks, which I think if that was actually kind of implemented, it would have taken 9 years or 15 years to actually get that done. So first off, bravo to all the corporations that keep business going and having to work from home and internet and all that to help that be achieved. But that brought up that major issue is you send your employees home. Those that had work laptops, for the most part, they're kind of safe. That's a kind of different use case. But for the rest of us, and I'd say 70% of corporations or employees went home and they logged into their company networks with their home computer. And you're right. What issues does this bring up? Their home network, how secure is that? How secure is their home computer? And then also the files that they access, hopefully they're using a VPN to access their network. They're pulling down those files and they're stored on that home computer. Well, we just talked about data erasure. They're still there after they're deleted. Are they being securely erased at end of life? And what happens after that?
Yeah, it's going to be curious to see if corporations when someone leaves the company, it's like, well, we want your personal computer back because you worked on it during the pandemic. I could see this getting really messy, but some companies just might choose to, we will buy your computer from you when you leave, when you quit the company. I don't know.
But then you're buying an old outdated computer and spending resources on that, and then you have to turn around and resell it. One of our products that we've come out with, we call it Wipe Drive Prime. What it is it's a file that you can send out to your employees. First off, you got to get their permission, right? Hey, we want to erase your home computer. They can push that out. The home user can go and download it, erase their home computer, and then when it's done, we have a QR code that pops up on the screen that has the error report, or a link to the error or to the log report, the certificate of destruction. So on their side, they can scan it and say, okay, this device has been securely erased, and then they can go from there and kind of provide that proof back to their company. But you're right. I mean, can you imagine if your company told you to erase your phone or erase your computer? That's not going to be a good discussion.
Yeah, that will be some interesting discussions in the upcoming months as people start going back into the office.
Yes.
So are there how does I know you guys primarily deal with physical hard drives, but when you talked about phones, it's like, well, we have SSD memory in our, maybe it's not SSD. There's memory in our phones. There's memory. You have flash drives, you've got all sorts of other types of media.
Yeah.
How do we deal with those sort of things?
So first off, the data is on those devices, okay? The manufacturers all, for the most part, do an encryption reset. That's why it happens like that. Mm-hmm. If you ever reset your phone or erase it and it happens in 4 or 5 seconds, it's an encryption code reset. So they go into the encryption, they say create a new encryption key, and then they say, okay, you're clean, there's no more data left on this. The concern we have on this side as a data security company is that you have this phone, you've reset the encryption key, but how long until that encryption is broken? Mm-hmm. Now, we have encryption from 2010, 2011, we can break. So this phone has data on there. It moves into storage or into warehouses. It goes to different places. Let's say it just ends up in someone's drawer, and then a decade from now they go and they open it up and they address it, and they can find corporate information or private health information because they can break that encryption. Mm-hmm. So our concern on our side is encryption keys are great. It's a great methodology to kind of quickly erase or quickly deny access to that device. But on SSDs and flash media, you can still recover that information later on if that encryption is compromised. Mm-hmm. So that's a big concern on our side. We kind of let people know encryption keys resets are great. We do that with Wipe Drive, and then we'll overwrite it as well. So you kind of get the double protection.
Mm-hmm. So do most phones and operating systems allow you to wipe SSDs kind of with that full pass, or is that something you really have to get an additional software package to do or jump through hoops to do?
You typically have to get an additional software package to do it, just because those manufacturers don't want to be liable for the data still on there. That's a big vulnerability they have on their side. So they're going to say, hey, we reset it, we do this. And if you look into it, they're going to say, well, we're not here saying all your data is gone. We're not promising you anything. That's kind of the third-party providers like ourselves. We've been doing this for 23 years. We have cybersecurity insurance. We do all that, all that area so that you on your side can know when you run Wipe Drive, you get that certificate of destruction or that log report, all the data is gone. And that also helps with your audit process as well. You have proof saying, hey, device A through 2000 have all been securely erased on this date and time with this software package, and now we've resold them or donate them to a charity, whatever we want to do on our side.
And that's probably a good point, is that you don't want, as a company, you don't want accusations that you were just throwing drives into the trash can out back. Yet you want a documented process where, look, we have documentation of when we took drives out of service, how we took them out of service, when we wiped them, and where they went afterwards, as opposed to, I don't know where it went.
Well, that's part of the data security policy. And one of the huge issues with data is once it leaves your facility and it's sitting on a device, it could pop up, like I said, a decade later or 5 years later. So let's say, and this is just theoretical, let's say that the federal data privacy law eventually has teeth in it. where it's 50,000 a data breach or something like that. Well, you have all these devices that are sitting in a warehouse, someone else's warehouse, and a decade from now or 15 years from now, they come out and it's a data breach. Well, you didn't address them today, but you're risking 2036.
Yeah.
Company in 2036. So there's a mindset where where most corporations have to say, hey, this is important. We have to address it immediately. Otherwise, we're going to be at risk. And it's hard to see that far down the road.
Yeah. It's sometimes it's a hard sell for IT managers to say, well, we need to spend the money now to do something to prevent a future risk that isn't a current risk.
Yeah. And data erasure is looked at as a cost. Let's be honest. We're not helping earn more revenue. We're not helping anything be more efficient. We're just removing that data and that liability. So it's hard for IT managers to argue for it. It's gotten better. I think the acceptance has kind of passed that curve of acceptance, and it's worth the cost, and the budgeting's kind of getting there for most corporations.
It's just become a cost of doing business.
It is, It's built into the full IT life cycle, and that cost is associated, and which tool they're going to use, and where those reports go, and who manages the audit on those reports. All that's kind of built into it now for most corporations.
Mm-hmm. So I was just kind of thinking, like, I know hard drives have gotten smarter in a sense. There's more chips on them. You have drives that are combination of a spinning platter in addition to solid state, so you kind of get the price and the performance all working together. What happens if you have a drive that it has failed in terms of your operating system can't interact with the drive? Now you have data that's on the drive, but you can't issue that one pass. You can't tell the flash drive, write zeros and ones. You can't tell it to reset the encryption key. What do you do in those sort of situations?
Yeah. So, there's a verification at the end of every overwrite, right? So if we can't address a drive, or if that drive has a lot of bad sectors, there's a lot of different kind of levels where we say with some corporations, they want 0 bad sectors. Mm-hmm. If there's one bad sector, we fail it, we spit it out. And on your side, we say, hey, shred it, destroy it, do what you need to do on your side. But we can't address this on the software-based level. Mm-hmm. So that's the recommendation there, is destroy those drives. With SSDs, the NSA requires, I forget the size now. It's like a 0.01 centimeter shred size, to get down there and make sure that every chip is completely obliterated. So you would need to do that.
So for consumers, what's the best, if they've done their drive wipe and they've lost control of the drive, they can't access it. Mm-hmm. They don't want to spend, how much does it cost to wipe a drive? To shred a drive? 20, 40, 50 bucks? If it's a consumer and you don't have a contract?
Yeah.
$100?
Yeah.
So what's the best thing the consumer do? Just go out and grab a nail, try to pound it through?
That's a tough one on their side, because most of these drives are pretty sturdy nowadays. And so in order to drill through it or destroy it, it's going to be a little bit of a headache. But we do recommend that on physical or on platter-based hard drives, a drill press or a sledgehammer. If you have a way to crush and destroy it, that's a great way to go. If you have an SSD, it's a little more difficult. There's little chips inside of the SSD, and you have to destroy each one of those. It's a little bit of a headache, but on their side, I would do it. Tax documents, videos, pictures, everything on that drive. You don't want that getting out. And the idea that things stick around for so long nowadays, it's not just a blip and it disappears. Yeah. If it gets out there, it's out there for good as a consumer. So that's a big issue as well.
Yeah, I know from personal experience that it's getting harder and harder to physically destroy drives. It used to be that you drop a hard drive off your desk and it's almost like glass and it shatters.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I was out there with a hammer just trying to even put a dent in the external, the structure of the hard drive. And I was surprised at how much effort it took to just even dent the darn thing. Yeah. And I was like, well, gosh, if I could barely dent the outside, have I even crushed a platter? Have I caused anything to even break?
So what most consumers can do is they can search for, at least for those home computers they want to get shredded, they can search for ITADs in their area or go to nateonline.com or eStewards.com. These are the associations of IT asset disposition companies, the ones that process secondhand computers, and they have shredders and everything on site. These companies they have no problem. There's probably, I'd say there's 200 or 300 throughout the U.S. So there's probably one within a half hour, an hour of wherever you are. And I'm sure you can call them up and say, hey, I have 5 drives I'd like to get shredded. You can stop by, and I'm sure they'll work something out with you. They want to help you on their side as well.
Yeah, I remember the days of like big giant magnets for
Degaussing.
Electromagnets and things like that.
Well, degaussers don't work on SSDs and flash media.
Yeah.
So there's a whole avenue there where you had all these degaussers out there. They work perfect on hard drives and platter-based drives to destroy and make them unusable. Right after degaussing, you couldn't use that drive again, which is a big e-waste issue. But on SSDs, the data was still there. So now you had to shred them. It was the only way to physically destroy those chips, and you had to get it down to that small size as well.
So here's like an operational question, I suppose, for companies that do drive removal or drive wiping in-house, or people that are wanting to do it themselves.
Sure.
As drives are hitting these like multiple terabyte, I mean, I think I just bought an 8 terabyte drive the other day to replace one in a NAS. That's like, how long does it now take to wipe a 16 terabyte drive?
Right.
With a single pass?
With a single pass. What's nice, it is a single pass now. Can you imagine DoD3 on those ones? It'd take 3-4 times the time. What's really nice with SSDs is their speed to erase per gigabyte is so much faster. So let's say an 8 terabyte drive, on the hard drive side, it's still the speed of that device. So 72800 RPM or whatever that RPM is in order to erase it. We have to address every sector. So it's going to take hours to erase that 8 terabyte drive. Probably somewhere around the neighborhood of 20, maybe more for that if it's a platter-based drive. What's nice on the SSD side is it can be addressed so much faster. We have 1 terabyte drives that can be erased in about 22 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And that's not the encryption key. That's going through every area of that device and erasing the data on that device as well. So an 8 terabyte, 160 minutes, you're looking at 2.5 hours to erase that device. So it is a length of time. Everyone would love it to be, instantaneous. All the data is gone. That's where the encryption key is. They're like, hey, just erase the encryption key and you're good. You're all set. 35 seconds later, but your data is still sitting there. So we recommend taking the time, addressing it properly, getting all that data securely erased, and then on your side, the headache hopefully is gone on your side.
Yeah. And then I suppose we should always be mindful of like SD cards and cameras when we get rid of cameras, and probably most of the current cameras don't have physically installed, like they're hot swappable. I remember the old digital cameras, you had to it was hardwired in.
What about TVs? What about IoT devices? There's a whole area we're getting into where there's devices, washer dryers, there are fridges. There's a whole area of your fridge can now have a screen there with pictures on it. How do you erase that so that when the next person gets it, they don't see your pictures or download your pictures or have access to your pictures? There's a whole area here where I think as IoT keeps progressing to where the natural state is, they're going to be data-bearing devices. Yeah. That's why everyone refers to it as DVD. There's just everything's going to have data pretty soon stored on it, and you have to address all that data wherever it's at.
That starts becoming like I can think of people like you're moving out of the country, and like how many devices do we have that potentially have data on them? I've got old laptops in a safe. I've got a couple of old phones laying around. I've got some smart cameras. Like, oh gosh, there's just tons of data everywhere.
There is, and our side to help the consumers is we actually provide our wipe drive home version for free for 1 or 2 licenses for free. Just use the code HOMEFREE, HOMEFREE. You can download it from our website and erase 1 or 2 computers on us, because we know everyone has 2 or 3 laptops in the closet, 4 or 5 hard drives stored away, and they're sitting there going, I don't want to let these go. I am too worried about it. But at the same time, what's happening there is we're storing all these devices that could go into the secondhand market, maybe go to third world countries or to charities or people that need to have computers. And we're actually holding on to a bunch of devices that if we process them correctly, they could go into the circular economy and help others and be used before they're just e-waste. And we just dump them into the trash.
And I suppose there's also the risk of, I'm sure some people, out of fear of not knowing what to do with it, they just store it. So they might have a closet full of old hard drives that haven't been wiped, that someone could come along and steal those drives and have all the content on them.
That's why they're stored there. They're worried about it. And we know a lot of corporations that have a storage area in their basement just full of old devices. And once a year or every other year, they say, okay, you're the tech. Go down there, start erasing computers. Well, the chain of custody there is it's locked up, by a lock or code or locked doors. But what if someone gains access to it and there's value in it? An SSD is worth $50, $80. What if they start stealing those and they sell them on eBay? Someone buys it on eBay, runs a data recovery tool, which is free online. They can see all the videos and pictures and files on that device, and they start pulling off Excel docs and PDFs from your corporation. And you have bad actors that are ruining your chain of custody. Yeah. And that's why on our side, we say erase first. When an employee leaves, have your tech show up or push out wipe drive remotely, erase that device, get that report back. And then on the screen, it'll have the QR code so you know it's been erased. And then it doesn't matter where it goes. It's all your data is safe, which is the most important part.
Yeah, it's just part of the exit interview process. As soon as the person's done, someone pulls whatever data we need off the machine, we pull it off, we reset it, and put it back into service as a fresh machine. Yeah.
And what's nice is with most of our computers are thin clients. Everything's on the network. We're not really storing major information on our computers or items that are vital to get off before we erase it. Typically, we can erase any device and that information's backed up or stored elsewhere.
Yeah, there's always a copy of something elsewhere.
Oh yeah.
Whether you want to, whether you like it or not, there's a copy.
It has to be out there somewhere. Yeah.
So we'll definitely make sure that we put a link to the website where they can use that coupon code to wipe a machine of their own. Is there any parting advice that you have for consumers?
On the consumer side, I recommend pushing for harsher legislation to protect your data. I think that's the unknown item to most consumers is the value of their data, the risk that if it gets out, and also the permanent risk of that data. Just changing your social security number is a big headache, but there's a whole bunch of other things that happen there if your birth date gets out and other information. So what we recommend on their side is to talk to your political representatives and say, hey, we need a legislation that has teeth. Because once corporations have to protect consumer data, they will start protecting consumer data. They can. The processes are there. There's just no financial incentive to incorporate it or implement it. So on our side, we recommend pushing for that. 10 years from now, we'll realize how important our data is. Let's protect it now so that we don't have to realize later what mistake we haven't solved now.
Yeah, that's the challenging thing, is to figure out what the risk is 10 years from now for stuff that's happening today.
Yeah, exactly.
Paul, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be on the Easy Pray podcast. Appreciate talking with you and your listeners. And if there's any questions, please reach out to us at whitecanyon.com. My name's Paul Katzoff. You can reach me on Twitter at Paul Katzoff. Tweet me, tweet my company. We're happy to answer any questions you have on data security, on the consumer side, the corporation side, whatever you're doing your side. We're an expert. We'd love to help you.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Pray podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a review at easypray.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Paul Katzoff can be found at easypray.com/61.